and welcome to the Yarn Parlor. I'm Allison. You can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as alevitt1. Today is Tuesday, February 2nd. This is episode 3. Very excited. This is my podcast about knitting and spinning, focused on design, given my background in fashion as a technical designer. I'm starting a Ravelry group hopefully this weekend, maybe. And if I find the time, I'll get the show notes there. If not, next episode I will definitely have show notes going. They will be in the Ravelry group, but if I get the Ravelry group going, it'll most likely be this weekend. Starting this episode, I wanted to spotlight a new pattern that I found, which I think is absolutely amazing, so I wanted to share it with you. It's called the Waiting for Rain shawl. It's a crescent shawl with a short row lace technique. It is by Sylvia. You can find her on Instagram and Ravelry as Soft Sweater. Let me try and find a picture of it. I hope this comes up. If not, I will try to put a picture of it in here. So the lace pattern in there is short rowed, and she just published this a couple days ago, and she's starting a cal for it, or started one yesterday. I wanted to highlight this pattern because it's one of those patterns where I have so much stuff on my needles, but as soon as I saw it, I bought it. And I don't know if you've ever been super inspired to just, you see something and you're like, oh my God, I need that right now. I mean, it happens with yarn all the time, but very rarely does it happen with me and a pattern. So I just wanted to show you guys because I think that this lace short rowing technique is really cool. So it makes me want to stop knitting what I'm knitting on and work on this shawl. I'm not going to, but in a couple months, I'm sure that you'll see it on my needles at some point. So I did buy the pattern, and it's a charted and written pattern, and she gives tips and video links. It's written excellently. So I just wanted to share that one with you. And it is a paid for pattern. It's $7 Canadian. Yeah, I think it's a great pattern and everybody should go out and buy one. Moving on to my February sock and swatch challenge yarn. So for my sock yarn, I have White Birch Fiber Arts. This color is Nothing Says Screw You Like a Rainbow. It's a self-striping, so you get the rainbow in there, and then you get the blue and white, like clouds or sky, in between the stripes. And here's the label for that. Found them on Etsy. I think most people know of this company by now, but it's a superwash merino 20 nylon, 80 superwash merino 20 nylon, 400 yards. For my next episode, I'll have a pattern. I'm thinking either something with a slip stitch, so in between each stripe, it'll have that little slip stitch, or just something really crazy and funky, but I will show that pattern. I'll have a pattern next episode to show you. So originally, the sock yarn that I was supposed to be using was the Gnome Acres Doppelganger, the same that I knit my dad's socks out of. I bought a set for me as well. Now, if this is your first episode that you're watching, I've created this sock challenge where every month I'm knitting a pair of socks. and I've already got the 12 skeins picked out. So the No Makers was my already chosen yarn for this month. However, I just finished my dad's socks and I don't need to, I love the yarn. It's not a problem. I will eventually. It's in my 12 months, so I'm eventually going to knit with it for myself. But, you know, I just knit a pair of socks with it. I need something more inspirational. And Diane from Suburban Stitcher is doing a rainbow along this month. And I knew I had rainbow sock yarn in my 12 months, so I kind of swapped them. It's totally fine. I make up the rules as I go. So that is why, that's what happened with this rainbow. So I'm purposely knitting on a rainbow item so that I can enter into the rainbow along cal. She started that yesterday and it ends on February 29th. So that's this, and I will have a pattern next episode. On to my swatch yarn. So again, if you're new, I've made up a swatch challenge for myself. I'm calling it the Deborah Newton Swatch Challenge because it is inspired by Deborah Newton, who is a knitwear designer, and she's written a couple books on finishing skills of sweaters. I took a class with her last October for Vogue Knitting Live, and she challenged us with this swatch challenge. Every month I will have a skein of yarn of a new texture, a new yarn content, and I'll knit 3 swatches out of the skein, one being stockinette, and yeah, so I named it the Deborah Newton Swatch Challenge. So the yarn for this month is El Cielo. It's a Cascade yarn. This one is color 06. You may have seen this recently because Jimmy Bean's beanie bags, they put a sample of this yarn in their beanie bag for January, I believe it was. I do not get those, but I've seen people talk about them on their podcasts. So it is a 89% superfine alpaca, 11 nylon, 580 yards in 100. This is a 100 gram ball. So there's a lot of yardage, which is amazing. Last month I looked on Ravelry to find out what other people were saying about that yarn, so I did the same for this, and I'll probably do it for all of them just to get an idea of how I should work with the yarn. Ravelry is a plethora of information and everybody should use it that way. So it does have, it's very fluffy, as you can see. It has a huge halo, but a lot of people commented that it doesn't shed a lot, so that's good. It's really thin yarn, but it's super fluffy like a mohair. Because of this, they used larger needles, and the suggested needle size is 8 millimeters, which is 8 US, which is a 5 millimeter. But a lot of, somebody commented that they would actually use a 9 as the smallest needle, and make sure to use pointy needles because of the halo, because it defines the stitch better, or can pick up the stitch better. So I think I will be doing that. I've got my Hiya Sharp interchangeables. So this is my February swatch yarn. Now for January swatch yarn, I have Done and Blocked. Let me take a quick sip. I used Linen Loose, which is a 70 virgin wool, 30 linen blend. And here is, I still have some yarn left over, which I didn't really want to do. Some of my swatches came out smaller than what I wanted to use the whole ball, but it's kind of hard to judge. But here is the yarn. It's a felted wool with little, if you can see the white, there are little flecks of linen in it, which make it a really crisp, dry hand feel For my first swatch, I did stockinette. I'm going to do stockinette for all of them just to see how stockinette knits up. So there is the stockinette swatch. I knit this on US 5s, which is a 3.75 millimeter. And after blocking, it got a little bit softer, but it still has that crisp, dry hand feel, which is, it is what it is. It's nice. The second swatch I took out of the sequence knitting book, which I'm going to talk about at the end of the episode because it's a brilliant book. I love it. This is textured. They don't really have names, but it's a textured knit. Most of the stitches in there are textured. I did US 3 3.25 millimeter for my needle size because it was on the 5s and 4s, it was a little bit too holey. I wanted it to be more compact and tighter, which creates a lovely stiff fabric. So if I want to design a sweater with a lot of body, a lot of like big boxy, and keep its shape, I would use the smaller needles. And then for my third swatch, I used, it was called Diagonal Ridges from Lace and Eyelets, the book Lace and Eyelets. I used US 4s, which is a 3.5 millimeter. I love this fabric. This one just really inspires me because it has a beautiful drape. Like, it's got this nice volume right here. Can you see? Yeah. Nice volume. It keeps its shape because of the felted wool and the linen. It really drapes nicely. The stiffness adds this drape. It doesn't just like silk would drape, but it would lose this volume shape, this fabric here. It would just kind of fall and not have any type of body to it. So if I were to design with this yarn, oh, and I wanted all of the swatches to be like this size, but my first couple attempts, they're just too small. But I'll get better at it. Judging, I weighed out my yarn in the beginning and saw how much I had, so I knew how many grams I should use, but I was kind of guessing. I just started knitting and cast it on and started knitting. And, you know, I'll get better at judging as I go on. Weighing, and maybe I should actually like wind them into 3 separate balls. But I also wanted to create like a square swatch, so it depends more on how many stitches I cast on. So for designing with this, I would probably do either a boxy sweater because of the stiff body that it will give, this yarn will give, or I would do like a cascade cardigan, you know, those cardigans that are open in the front and just have like this billowy drapiness in the front. You can see that. But I was also thinking, because of the feltedness and because it is stiff and it's a crisp and tough yarn, I was thinking even a skirt could be made out of this yarn because it's already felted, so it's not, I don't think it's going to pill that much. And it's a tough yarn, so it can take the abuse of being a bottom. I don't particularly like knitting bottoms, but it's something you could probably use this yarn for, and it'll hold up. So it's another thing to consider. Moving on to, oh, I wanted to go over how I'm keeping my swatches. I'm just using a plain journal notebook. I'm obsessed with notebooks, all kinds of notebooks. I just love notebooks. But I'm just writing in here, keeping all my information as to the yarn, the content, how many stitches I cast on, what swatch it's for, like numbering out the 3 swatches, the needles I use, the stitches, what stitch pattern I'm using, and where I got it from. What I am working on right now is my Nurmalin 2 from last episode, which I keep in my Christmas pudding from Danny of the Little Bobbins podcast. I worked on this one a little bit. Here is where I was, my progress keeper. That's where I was the last episode. So I finished that garter, that section of garter, and I started the next section of lace. I have one more section of garter and then the border of lace. I'm holding one strand of, where is it, Haute yarns. This is all that I have left. I'm definitely going to run out of this for the next section of garter, probably in like the 6th row. So I need to figure out what I'm doing there, but I don't really want to think about it until it actually happens, till I know where I am, because I don't know what I'm gonna do. Maybe I'll stripe it with something or just add in something else. I've got plenty of neon yarn, so there's no problem there. But this is Haute Knit Yarns. You can find her on Etsy. Simple sock. I believe it's Neon Rainbow. What is it called? Neon Rainbow Dreams. It's 75 superwash merino, 25 nylon. It was a mini skein, so it was only 231 yards, which is why I'm running out of yarn. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I will have to figure that out. And then I'm holding it with Alchemy's mohair, silk mohair. It's 40 silk, 60 mohair, 325 yards. This is the colorway Booze Garden. I love it. It's so bright. It's so bright. So, I don't know, a couple more days of that and it should fly fine. It is an asymmetrical shawl and just in time for spring. What else did I want to say? Oh, I'm using ChowGoo size 6s, which is a 4mm needle, and I love ChowGoos. So they're nice and pointy. It helps. Sock knitting is really slow for me, but I will power through. So it's my January sock. It's Minnesota Moonlight is the pattern by Kat Bordy. And I'm using Mountain Girl yarns in the Calvin and Hobbes colorway. You can find her on Etsy. This is a 75 superwash BFL, 25 nylon. There was 464 yards. Here is my finished sock. She came up with a heel. It's called this Cat's Sweet Tomato heel, and which I had never done before, so I was really excited to try that out, and a rounded toe, which I had never done before. So it's a toe up, and there's the heel. I think I did too many. It's done in wedges, and I think I did too many on this wedge, so it should be down a little bit more, which will help hold that. Maybe I'll try it on the second sock, do a little revision there. But the leg has a cable pattern, and then the front is a lace, which I'll twist that around. I haven't blocked this yet, I just put it on the sock blocker, which is my Burning Impressions. Yeah, Burning Impressions. You can find them on Etsy. Burning Impressions 2, actually, is what their name is. And they're out of Canada, and they are amazing sock blockers. I love these. I love the little needle and yarn ball, and then she put my name on it, asked me if I wanted my name on them, and she puts the size at the toe. So this is my finished sock. I did, is it Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Cast Off? Somebody's Surprisingly Stretchy Cast Off? And I used size 0 needles, which is 2mm, 66 stitches. I'm using my Carbons DPNs, and I love this pattern. She writes patterns. It's another paid for pattern, but she puts in so many tips and so many videos. Everything that every step of the way she has a tip or a video about it, or just a technique of how to do it, and it's very well done. Socks are new to me, so I don't know how to do everything. I'm still not fond of other people's sock recipes when they just have like a generic cast on a toe, knit for this many rows, just add in whatever heel you want. Like, I don't know how to do the heels, so I like a pattern right now that gives me every single step of how to knit the sock. I need help. I need all the help I can get with my sock knitting. So, and this pattern does that. It gives, and I like how the lace starts. Let me take this off. How the lace starts on the foot in the front, and then it goes up the leg. It's kind of a cute detail. So it starts down here before you start the heel. So I like that. The second one, I've cast it on the toe, and that's all that I've done. But I'll have more time this month to knit on it, along with my February socks. Yeah, so that's all that I have on my needles right now. On to my spinning. I was spinning on the fiber that I bought for my first spinning projects. It is Lydia Yarns. It's a 100% superwash BFL. I bought 4 ounces, and the colorway is Ugly Duckling. It's really cute. It was pink with, this is all that I have left, so that's what I'm showing you, from a 4-ounce braid. It was pink, this light pink with splashes of yellow and like a bluey purple. So here's how I'm spinning. And I have a section already done, so I'm going to ply this and hopefully come up with a fingering weight, because one of my goals is for this year is to spin fingering weight and then knit a pair of socks. I think I'm getting better with spinning consistently. Towards the end there, it got a little bulky, but it's a lot of fun, and if you haven't tried spinning, I recommend it because it's very relaxing. So that is that. Oh, here is, I don't have a complete card, but that's Lydia Yarns, and like I said, you can find her on Etsy. She also sells yarn. I have some of her yarn, but I was told that BFL is a really good beginner fiber, so that's because of its long staple, so that's why I bought that. I like BFL, but because of the long staple, I think it's actually hard to draft, but I can understand why it's a good beginner one, because it is so long. It really helps you with your drafting. The other yarn that I spun was from Corriedale Wool. I have a sampler of Wisteria. They're wisteria.com, yeah, it's down there. And here's the yarn I spun from that. I believe this is their raspberry colorway. And I've wound this onto my 1 yard nitty knotty, which I bought at Katrinkles. You can find her on Etsy, and it's collapsible. So I can pull that apart and it collapses to like half the size. It's really cute and small, and you can carry it anywhere. I like the 1 yard for now. When I start spinning more, or if I get a wheel and spin like 200 yards of something, I will need a larger one, but you can find her there. And I've also bought from her, actually here's her card. A couple other things I got from her is a cute needle gauge. She does needle gauges with the state on it, which I thought was adorable. And I've bought this wraps per inch gauge, and it's a corgi, which is so cute, and it reminds me of Gabby from Once Upon a Corgi. Such a cute podcast. You should check her out. It's another knitting podcast, and she's very good. I would like to give a small book review on the sequence knitting book that I used for this swatch from the Linen Los. Sequence knitting is by Cecilia Campo Chiaro. Her background, her profession is in chemistry, and she self-published this book last year. You can find her at sequenceknitting.com and book information there. Her definition of sequence knitting is knit a sequence of stitches repeatedly using some kind of rule to create a fabric. It's a very basic definition. A simple example is knit one, purl one as a sequence. Now if you have an even amount of stitches and you knit one, purl one, and then on the second row you purl one, knit one, you're going to get a rib pattern. But what she's saying, one of her methods is if you knit one, purl one, take that sequence and with over an even amount of stitches, and then do it every row. So if you knit one, purl one along 10 stitches, and then your next row you knit one, purl one, you're going to end up with a seed stitch. That's the simplest form of describing sequence knitting. She comes up with more complex stitches, and with these 4 methods that she's come up with, it changes the texture around it. If you do it over an odd number of stitches, what's the stitch pattern that you'll come up with? And it's really interesting, the textures, as you can see from the front of the book. All of these methods in here, or all of the patterns that are in here, are very easy to remember, the repeats. So you get this beautiful texture from something that's easy to remember. You don't need a chart to look at. You don't need written instructions to constantly, what's row number 20? It's just the same sequence of knit one, purl one, whatever, knit 3, purl 1 on an odd number of stitches on every row. Like, it's just that kind of sequencing that will give you a different texture. So she's come up with 4 methods on how to do it and has defined 4 different reversibility aspects to the pattern that you're using. So with this stitch pattern, a lot of the textures are reversible, whether it's a mirrored image or not. She has defined 4 reversibilities. The book also has, along with being a stitch dictionary, it's got 45 patterns in it for scarves, hats, cowls, shawls, and I think there's even a pattern for arm warmers in here using these different stitch patterns. The last chapter is on design considerations. So just thinking about what fibers you would use and how they would show up with the textures, and also taking into consideration colors. If you're using 2 different colors, if you're knitting 2 at the same time, if you're knitting like not stranded, but if you're knitting one row, using 2 different colors, knitting one row, one color, and then the other row a different color, how it would look on front and back. Oh, another thing, in all of her patterns, she'll put a photo, beautiful photo, she did all the photos herself, a beautiful photo of the front and the back of how the texture will look, so that you can see the different reversibilities that she's describing. You can actually see it from how it's going to look on the face and how it's going to look on the back knit up, which I think is really interesting. Not a lot of stitch dictionaries will show you the back. I mean, some of them, if it's like a lace or an eyelet stitch, you might not want to use the back. You might want to use the back. Not a lot of them will put a back view on it, so I found that really interesting. At the very end, she gives you the equation on how to make your own knitting sequence patterns. So the book is simpler stitches. Maybe it's like a 7 or 8 stitch pattern, but she'll give you the equation to figure out something more complex. She made this book so that you can easily remember it. It's something that you don't have to really even think about. It's just, you've got it for memory, these 8 stitches, and that's what you repeat over your rows. You don't have to look at a chart or anything. But if you want to make up your own sequence, she gives you the equation to do that over a larger number of stitches if you want. So I found that really cool. Yeah, so if you love textured knitting and you're an easy textured knitting, I recommend that you look into the sequence knitting book. I think it's a very good stitch dictionary to have in your library. And that's it for today's episode, I think. Thank you very much for watching. You can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as alevitt1. Leave comments and questions below, or find me at Ravelry or Instagram. Please subscribe, like the video if you like the video. And I will see you next week. Thanks so much. Bye.